Good morning and welcome to day 3 of IMF World Bank Week at the Atlantic Council. I'm Josh Lipsky, Senior Director of the Council's Geoeconomics Center. Throughout the week, we are hosting finance ministers and central bankers from around the world, both at our headquarters here in Washington and inside the IMF at our broadcast center in HQ1. Today, we begin our program with a distinguished guest, the Minister of Economy, Trade and Business of Spain, Carlos Cuerpo. The minister assumed his role in December 2023 and brings an extensive record of economic policy making. He previously served as Secretary General of the Spanish Treasury, where he managed relations with the international financial institutions, including the IMF and World Bank. During Spain's EU presidency last year, he served as lead negotiator on the Stability and Growth Pact and the new EU fiscal rules, which we'll discuss today. He was also the Director General of Macroeconomic Analysis in the Economy Ministry. In short, a person who can speak with expertise about the Spanish and European economies, as well as the role his country plays in the Bretton Woods system. Minister, thank you for being with us this morning. We know how busy your schedule is. Welcome to Washington.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
So I want to start with the Spanish economy. We got the WEO yesterday, an upgrade of 0.4 from the January projections. Spain projected in 2024 to grow at 1.9%, higher than many Euro area peers. What do you attribute the strength to?
Well, thanks a lot. I think we should go back to 2023, where Spain actually grew already 5 times above the Euro area average. Yeah. Prospects for 24 and 25 are also that Spain would be one of the growth engines of the Euro area. And when you look also at the high-frequency data, what's going on already in the first few months of 2024, it's already actually good data in terms of labor market, in terms of consumer confidence, in terms of industrial production. So the Spanish economy is actually proving to be very resilient. When you look at the different elements that are also defining our growth momentum, you see that it's a balanced growth path, because actually we're having this growth momentum with strong job creation, with external surplus, which was not the case in previous positive business cycle moments in the Spanish history. And also we're doing this with fiscal responsibility. That is, we expect end of 2024 to have a drop of 20 percentage points in our debt to GDP ratio with respect to the peak after the pandemic. So these all, I think, configures a good way forward in terms of balanced growth path that will be sustainable also in the medium term.
So how do you deal with discrepancies within the Euro area? I mean, we look at Germany's projections, very slow growth, if not coming out of recession. Obviously, this has to impact Spain, major trading partner within the Eurozone.
Well, it's actually a very good point. So all these positive data on Spain, it's happening at the same time that we witness a deceleration of our main trading partners, which actually gives even somehow a higher degree of importance to the great figures, to the good figures of the Spanish growth momentum. So what we expect is somehow a pickup of growth in our main trading partners by the second part of the year, 2025 as well, which will be a tailwind for the Spanish economy, which would be another positive element going forward. But what we're witnessing, I said that we had surplus in our external account, but what we witness is also a huge investment interest in Spain. We have foreign direct investment that is actually growing over the past 4 or 5 years. When you look at greenfield projects, new investment projects, Spain is actually 4th in the world in terms of new projects for the past 5 years. So it's also a good sign in terms of confidence of world investors in the Spanish economy.
Are there particular sectors that are leading that kind of investment, or is it a range?
Well, it's sectors related to, of course, renewable energies, and sectors related to high tech as well, semiconductors and others. So basically, the sectors where, in terms of economic policy, we're putting all the stress, all the emphasis, also related to our recovery plan with next generation EU funds.
I want to ask about EU funds and how they're going to be spent. But I want to talk about some of the challenges. Youth unemployment still very high in Spain. This is a persistent issue across the euro area, including in Spain. I think it's higher than the average in the Eurozone. What are the plans to continue to tackle youth unemployment?
Well, unemployment in general is a stock legacy that we've been dragging in Spain for the past or for the last decades, I would say. Even now, we're still trying to actually give some dent to this unemployment rate, particularly for the youth unemployment, where you said we are having numbers above the euro area average. And going forward, what we intend to do is trying to ease this mismatch that we see in the labor market between skills that firms are demanding in this new transformation, modernization of our activity, and qualification of our workers. So there is supply-demand mismatch that we will try to of course, ease with education policies and vocational training.
Then how are you dealing, and of course the labor force plays into this, with driving up domestic demand? Because there are challenges, as we talked about in the euro area. We hope trade picks up later in the year, as you identified. But stimulating domestic demand, and I'm curious how you're seeing the inflation challenge. Inflation coming down in the euro area, coming down in Spain as well. But it's questions about the ECB's policy path. We're going to talk about it throughout this week in Washington. How is this affecting the consumer in Spain?
Well, when you look at private consumption in Spain, it's been one of the driving forces of our growth figures. It's basically on the back of very strong job creation. So wages have been contained over the past couple of years, and thus not giving into these second round effects, which were one of the main concerns at the beginning of the hike in inflation. And these containment plus good evolution of employment figures is actually sustaining private consumption, and we expect good prospects in terms of job creation going forward, and some pickup of purchasing power of households, which will again give good sustainment to private consumption. On the external side, what we expect, as I said, is the slight recovery over the course of the next second part of the year of our trading partners that will help also on that front. But when it comes to inflation, I think somehow we're seeing a divide between what's going on in the US and what's going on in the euro area. So it appears that inflation is a bit more sticky in the US than in our case. And what analysts expect for the euro area is that there might be a decoupling, and that the ECB might start to actually decrease interest rates sooner than the Fed.
I saw President Lagarde say they're not Fed dependent. You know, central banks usually say they're data dependent, they're not Fed dependent. So do you think the ECB should cut in June? Should that be the beginning of the easing cycle for the ECB?
Well, we have to follow data in this case, and I agree that we have to be data dependent. And what we see is an easing of the inflation pressures. When we look at the data in Spain, there's moderation that is compatible with strong growth. That's actually happening. When you look at also underlying inflation, it's also going down. And when you look at the outlook from the ECB or from the Bank of Spain for Spain as well, you see that we will be reaching this 2% target already in 2025. So I think all these figures actually put somehow a good window of opportunity for the ECB to start reverting the interest rate cycle.
It's interesting because even a month ago, if we had met, it looked very different in the U.S. We thought we'd be cutting in March, maybe in June, but now that's been pushed back, and the ECB seems to be moving faster. We'll see the ripple effects of that. Kristalina Georgieva, the IMF managing director, was here last Thursday, and she talked about the impacts of a strong dollar around the rest of the world. I mean, this can have a lot of repercussions. I'm sure this will be discussed this week in Washington.
Yes, of course. I think it's going to be a very macro week in Washington this time around, and we expect also, of course, to see what's going to happen if there is a decoupling in the interest rate cycle between the Fed and the ECB to be one of the main elements in the discussion, not only in terms of exchange rates, but also in terms of emerging economies and their interest rate burden as well.
Well, let's talk about the euro area since we're talking about the ECB. You were deeply involved in the renegotiations on the EU fiscal rules. I wonder if you could walk us through them. A lot of compromises had to be made between major countries in the euro area to get them. Didn't change the top line figures in terms of what's expected debt to GDP ratios. How do you see the rules and how do they affect Spain?
Well, I think these rules are fit for purpose when you actually are a bit forward-looking in what are the main policy objectives for the next decade for the euro area or for the EU as a whole. What we're looking at is we're discussing twin transitions 2 years ago, and then it became a discussion on strategic autonomy, and then it became a discussion on economic security. But there is a common denominator to those discussions, which is the need for investment, and that's actually one of the main drivers of our discussions between finance ministers at the EU level. And this is one of the elements that was, of course, part of the discussion of the fiscal rules. We need fiscal rules that gradually consolidate public finances, but that are actually compatible with growth and our investment needs going forward. I think that's the main difference, this forward-looking nature of the new fiscal rules.
And you think they meet that? You say they're fit for purpose. And
I think it's an essential change with respect to what we had, and they're designed actually to meet this. Of course, domestic fiscal space will not be the only way to cover or to bridge this investment gap. Yeah. We will have to foster our capital markets union, so private sector financing as well, and we have to look at EU level financing, so centralized capacity for the EU to be able to finance what we call EU public good or genuinely public goods.
Well, I want to talk about NextGen EU in a second, but since you brought up capital markets union, any progress you expect on that? I feel like this is a perennial conversation we have every IMF World Bank meetings. I know that, I think it was 6 months ago, the ministers from Germany and France wrote an op-ed trying to move this forward. But anything you see on the horizon on capital markets union?
Well, that's a very good point. Actually, it's somehow a discussion that we've been having for the past decade almost. Right. But I think we are now at a good window of opportunity also in terms of capital markets union. Discussions are accelerating at the Eurogroup level on what can be done, also at the ECOFIN level. So the idea is also to take advantage of the Letta report, to take advantage of the Draghi report that will, I think, put an additional push to the conversation with very specific measures that we can undertake going forward. And then I think we might be able to not only grasp low-hanging fruits, but to make real progress.
I look forward to seeing progress on that, and we will continue to track that at the Council. We're very interested in that issue, both here at the Geoeconomics Center and our Europe Center. I want to talk about NextGen EU. Spain, one of the largest recipients of NextGen EU funds. How are those planning to be spent? I think we're in the 5-year cycle, so in 2026, so maybe over 160 billion euros total over that. What are the strategies to actually disperse that money in the coming years?
So we designed in 2021 our recovery plan, which is the main policy driver of how we will be spending these 160 billion, as you said, which is a mix between transfers and loans. Right. In 2 steps. So the first step was actually getting 70 billion in transfers, and it's not only investments. We have to take into account that the recovery plan is a mix of investments and structural reforms. So it's a fully fledged economic policy plan, not only with a double dividend in mind, of course, to push for the recovery after the pandemic, but also to fully transform our economies going forward. When we look at the data, at how the implementation of the plan is going on, out of these 70 billion that were the first, are going to be disbursed in the first phase of the plan, we have already committed almost 35 billion. So we're halfway in the road towards 2026, which is the end of NextGen EU funds, and we've committed already 50% of the funds. So again, with a very good pace, almost more than 1 billion a month. So it's, I think we still have to push for it. We still have to engage into the most important structural reforms that lie ahead of us, because they're part of somehow of a domestic reasoning and domestic identification of the main challenges of the Spanish economy. So it's not been imposed from the EU level. It's not men in black imposing a policy agenda on the Spanish economy. It's our identification of our own challenges that we put on the table and that we will be following up over the next few years.
It's not Brussels saying, how it should be spent. But then where is the money specifically going in terms of the priorities? Are there specific projects you'd point to so far, or that you're looking for in the year?
Well, there is an element, I think, that was in the design of NextGen EU funds, which was to prioritize the green agenda and also the digital transformation. So I think these are the 2 main vectors, and that's where everyone is actually pushing and putting most of the funds. In our case, again, these are the 2 main elements, with big strategic projects throughout, for example, on green hydrogen, throughout the whole country, on semiconductors, on batteries for electric vehicles. So I think we're really trying to get to these strategic autonomy elements of the value chain of these main sectors that will be driving our competitiveness going forward.
And do you have metrics that you evaluate the success of this spending? It's something we talk about a lot in the U.S. with fiscal spending. You're in a 5-year program, how you evaluate halfway through the program, what's working and what's not? Well,
that's actually a very good question. So, of course, we had an ex-ante estimation of what we thought the impact of the plan would be. We received a couple of weeks ago a mid-term evaluation from the Commission on the impact that they thought the plan had already had on our economies. I think their estimate for Spain was that by end of 2022, our GDP level would have increased by 1.9 percentage points compared to a situation without the plan. So the impact of the plan is already a reality. It's not just an opportunity for the Spanish economy.
That's a significant and real data to bring to the table, so that's helpful. Thank you. I want to turn to China. We've talked about this often when senior officials from Spain have come. In February, there was an announcement between China and Spain to ensure fair, just, and non-discriminatory business environment. But I want to contrast that with some of the things that are happening at the Commission level. The subsidy investigation on EVs, and then, of course, here in the US, there's all sorts of tensions. Even this morning, President Biden announcing an intention potentially to explore tripling of steel and aluminum tariffs. But how does Spain see itself in the China-Spain economic relationship?
Well, I think we have to understand that China is not only a key supplier, but is also a key competitor. I mean, for Spain, for the EU, but of course for the US. And the electric vehicle is a clear example where there is a sorpaso in the past couple of years. So here, I think from the Spanish perspective, which is very similar to some extent to the EU perspective, we try to keep a balance between two elements. So the core values of an open to trade and betting on a rule-based multilateral system, EU or Spain, and of course not being naive. So we have a fully fledged economic security agenda where we have to defend our strategic interests. So then this translates into specific regulation, and in the case of Spain, we have also regulation to defend our strategic interests from foreign direct investment, which tries to balance also the fact that we want to attract that investment, we want to be an attractive destination for FDI, but at the same time, we want to protect our strategic companies and our strategic sector and investment in those strategic sectors going forward.
I think what's so challenging, we have this in the US too, is defining what does it mean to be a strategic sector, because that definition can change based on the economic priorities of the month or the year. How do you see that? What are the strategic sectors from the Spanish perspective?
Well, in this sense, I think it's easier maybe now than it was in the past that we all have pretty much a common idea on where we want to bet in terms of investments. And as I said, we have a recovery plan that sets the limits to what we think are the key elements in terms of priorities and in our investment agenda. And this is pretty much what we follow. These main guidelines, which in the end, we're talking about high value-added technological sectors. We're talking about sectors related to the automobile industry, which, Spain is the second largest industry in Europe in terms of the vehicle sector. Then we have, of course, all elements related to renewables and the penetration of renewables in Spain. We're also a clear case in point here of a success story. Spain has been able to generate many days now for the past few months more than 50% of its electricity out of renewables, which again is proving to be a key competitiveness element for our firms.
So I'm going to turn to questions from the audience in a minute that I have online here. But just to broaden back out, you're here for IMF World Bank spring meetings. What are your goals? What are your objectives this week from the meetings? It's different, in the past we've talked IMFC and Spain's role, but it's a different perspective now in the chair you sit in.
Well, it's actually a very good point. We are in this transition from being chairing the IMFC. But I think in a sense there is an element of continuity in the work that has to be done at the IMF and the World Bank level in terms of providing for the proper solution of coming together that the multilateral system needs. There have been some good steps taken already when we talk about the special drawing rights issuance and the rechanneling efforts. And here Spain is a key actor. You know that we've committed to rechannel not only 20%, which was the general commitment from those who enter this rechanneling, but we will go up to 50%. So we are leading also the way in this. And then there is an intention, I think, and a general idea that we need to untap all the necessary financing that developing countries will need going ahead. So we have to avoid that there is a trade-off between developing finance for development and finance for climate mitigation, so for climate change mitigation. So on this, working on further SDR rechanneling, working on more private sector capitalization, working also in a sense of the replenishment of the more concessional instruments like IDA, like the PRGT. So there is an element there. There is a need to keep on pushing, not only pledging, but making good on the pledges. And from the Spanish side also in terms of debt relief, we are pushing forward, introducing contingent action clauses in our contracts of external debt that will be actually important, that will provide the relief for these countries whenever there is a climate change, climate event, or there is, for example, pandemic event, or also some element related to food insecurity. So whenever one of these three elements will be impacting a developing country, they will be able to stop the payment of interest on those external debt contracts, so that they can actually have some additional fiscal space to counteract these events.
You read my mind because I was going to ask you about IDA replenishment, but you already addressed that. So you're supportive of IDA replenishment in other ways. Mm-hmm. Let me just ask, about IMF, World Bank more broadly. Debt relief, the G20 common framework issues, this has been an ongoing struggle. Mm-hmm. When the managing director was here last week, she pointed to Zambia as one success story, but this is 3 years to get to the one success story. Progress in Ghana so far. How much of a challenge is this for faith and confidence in the multilateral system to be able to provide solutions here?
Well, I think there's been some, understanding that this is going too slow, so that we would need a common framework that works somehow in a more flexible way, that could actually accommodate more cases if there were. It has not been put to the test, fortunately, in terms of high demand from developing countries, but and highly indebted. But we need to have a discussion also on not only on how to make it more flexible, but what are the countries that could actually access it. We should be talking about not only low-income countries. There might be some middle-income countries that might need also debt relief going forward. And in a sense, I think a good breakthrough was the creation of the Sovereign Debt Roundtable. Mm-hmm. I think putting together around the same table all the relevant stakeholders has been a breakthrough, and we need to push to be able to actually deliver on this as well.
So I have time probably for 2 online questions. The first, and I'm not surprised to see this given the nature of our work, is on central bank digital currency. We do a lot of work at the Geopolitics Center. Obviously, the ECB in charge here running the digital euro project, mm-hmm. It seems like they'll move into a pilot phase this year based on what we know. What's Spain's perspective on a digital euro and how it could affect Spanish banks?
Well, actually that we've been discussing this at the euro area level for the past at least a couple of years more intensively, and that now the ECB, as you said, is entering the pilot phase. And this is important for us because it actually allowed us to really engage with the financial sector, to have clear discussions on where they thought that the specific elements of the calibration of the details of the digital euro, of the digital currency, would actually impact their business going forward. And these came together with events in March. Right. So it was actually, I think, a very fruitful discussion on what the use of the digital euro would be, because we need to provide for a use case for citizens as well. Right. And so what we have now on track at the euro area level is somehow a way for European citizens to have a truly pan-European digital currency. We have digital payments in Spain, which are working actually rather well with a very, very high penetration. We have a top-of-the-notch application, which is called Bizum, but we need to expand this at the euro area level. But the big question mark is whether we need a CBDC for these, or whether we should actually be going to provide for a wholesale sort of use case as well for the digital euro. And that's on the technical level. But then there is a political discussion as well to be held, and they're both evolving in parallel.
Yeah, I mean, we are far behind on these conversations in the U.S., so we're learning from the Euro area, and we look forward to seeing what developments come forward. Final question I'll take online before we close. It's about geopolitics. This past weekend, we saw Iran strikes on Israel. When we gathered 6 months ago in Marrakesh, on the eve of those meetings, were Hamas's terrorist attacks. It was almost precisely 6 months ago. Russia, Ukraine, and the ripple effects of that across Europe. How do you, as an economy minister, as a finance minister, think about geopolitics? This is a theme we've been talking about throughout the week here in Washington.
Well, first, let me strongly condemn. I will take advantage of your question to strongly condemn the attack of Iran on Israel last weekend. From the Spanish side, we are strongly pushing for a lasting peace in the region. I think we have to avoid at all costs any escalation in this conflict. And of course, we're pushing for peace, but also for the respect of international humanitarian rights. That's just as a statement in terms of how we see the current situation. But coming to the economic impact and how we see it from the finance minister's side or from the economic minister's side, there is a lot of concern on what the impact of any potential escalation, what the impact of somehow the continuity of different geopolitical events that are unfolding over the past couple of years, what this enhanced uncertainty will do to not only to trade but to financial markets or to even the price of some commodities. So we are following very closely. Hopefully, what we see over the past few days is that markets are contained. There is no, at least, priced in expectations of an escalation, but we have to be very careful and of course, push for avoiding to avoid this escalation.
Thank you for that. I think that's an appropriate note to end on. Minister, thank you for starting your week in Washington with us. We wish you best of luck throughout the meetings, and we promise here at the Council to continue to be your partner. I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. We have a full schedule both here at the Atlantic Council and at our broadcast center inside the IMF. At 3 p.m., we'll interview the finance ministers from South Africa. At 5:30, back at the Atlantic Council here, Ireland's finance minister. Stay with us. You can find the full agenda at Atlantic Council IMF World Bank Week. We wish everyone a good rest of the day.